We live in a world that our ancestors would barely recognize. Around the world, the impact of human ingenuity is now everywhere. We've pushed back the limits of our planet at speeds, depths, and heights that would have left our forebears breathless. Driving all these achievements is humankind's extraordinary gift for invention. Through genius and inspiration, we've created expectational solutions to complex problems. From the everyday to the spectacular, some of them good and some of them not so good. This series celebrates the million ways our great inventions have transformed our world.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It's a kind of superhero. It has made our work easier, changed our society, and shaped our landscapes. Hardly any other invention has had such a positive impact on feeding humankind as this one. Inside it, highly complex processes take place.
It's a factory on wheels. There are so many functionalities to this one machine.
This technological marvel has fundamentally changed the way we live. It can be up to 45 feet wide and weigh 18 tons. Almost as large as a small family house.
The majority of us would still be living and working in the countryside.
This great invention could ensure the survival of future generations.
With the population as large as it is, we are going to need to produce more food, even more food than we're producing today, to be able to sustain us all.
It has cost the lives of thousands of animals, and now it feeds millions of them. Without it, life as we know it today would be completely different. Our modern society is substantially influenced by it. The Combine Harvester. Modern combines carry out the harvest worldwide with technical precision. The reel brings the crop into position so that the cutter bar can chop the stalks before the crop is pulled into the jaws of the combine. Inside the combine harvester, metal rollers thresh the crop. The grains fall down. A blower separates the chaff from the grain. The straw is transported further to the rear. Together with the straw, all the unwanted plant parts land back on the field to enrich the next sowing season as nutrients.
What's fascinating about a combine harvester is that it's a factory, but a factory on wheels. It does the work of a dozen different people, all these different tasks out there in the field, in situ, and it just comes home with the finished product. It's incredible. It's a technical marvel.
How much this miracle of technology excites people is shown in this German TV commercial from the 60s.
Well, look at that! Now that's a machine. Nothing comes close.
The combine harvester holds the world record for threshing grain. In 8 hours, it harvests 675 tons of wheat. With that, it can supply 7 major cities with bread for a whole day. To that, 100 years ago, hundreds of workers would have had to slave away all summer. Man in harmony with nature and its seasons. With bare hands, he cultivates the land that feeds him. The pictures seem romantic, but the reality was completely different.
Working the fields with scythes was incredibly hard work. Strenuous activity, the posture that you would adopt with a bent back to be able to do this is not great for you. Hard times.
And that was just the agony of harvesting. In autumn, the hard work continued when the grain was separated from the ears and the chaff.
These were jobs that required incredible amounts of strength, skill as well, particularly think of the flail to separate the grains. Not easy to do. And then you'd be doing these for 10 hours at a time. Incredibly tiring and difficult work.
Combine harvesters have increased a farmer's yield 100-fold in a short time. But it was a long while before technology developed this far. The combine was preceded by 3 major inventions: the threshing machine, the mowing machine, and the sheaf-binding harvester. Without them, the combine harvester, as we know it today, would not exist. In 1828, Reverend Patrick Bell laid the foundation for today's combine harvesters and started a small revolution. His invention can cut grain, and since the priest from Scotland is a man of God, the sole purpose of his brilliant invention is to serve mankind. He doesn't apply for a patent for his design and, accordingly, doesn't earn a penny from his groundbreaking creation.
This machine fundamentally changed how harvests were done. With the machine, farmers could yield 10 or 20 times as much as previously with a human workforce.
The mowing machine quickly became a bestseller, at least in the USA. In America, farming machines became increasingly popular. There were large plains to cultivate and a notorious shortage of manpower. Every mechanical aid to utilize the vastness of the Wild West had a massive impact here. On the old continent, however, the situation was quite different.
Europe's farms looked like a huge patchwork rug. Small areas had been given down through the generations and sometimes split up between the children of farmers. And in Europe at this time, there were enough people to work the land. So purchasing an expensive, large machine just wasn't economic.
On the small European fields, the grain was cut by hand for much longer. But even though practical mowing machines were already chugging across the huge fields in America, here, collecting, tying, and stacking the bundles of grain was still done through hard manual labor. But a mechanical solution was soon to be found, even if it was in an unusual way. John Appleby, just 18 years old, helped on a farm and knew the troubles and worries of the harvest workers. Legend has it that the farm dog inspired his groundbreaking idea.
And as the dog struggled, it somehow bit the rope, pulled and twisted it into some kind of completely new knot that was perfect for binding corn. It was tight enough to keep the corn together and yet could be loosened when required. I have no idea how something... I mean, the dog is clearly the genius in this story. The dog is the great inventor.
With the dog's flash of inspiration, the grain could now be bound into sheaves. The simple yet ingenious knot held the grain bundles firmly together, but could also be easily untied if necessary. The sheaf-binding machine ushered in the agricultural-industrial revolution.
Just this early invention has had a huge positive effect on all of those workers. No longer are they having to use the size, no longer do they have these sort of back-breaking positions. The machine itself can do almost all of that work.
One thing, however, still had to be done by hand, collecting the ears of grain on the field and threshing them at the farm. But in the middle of the 19th century, the first steam-driven threshing machines appeared. Now, even though it was less physically hard work, lots of people were still needed to do the threshing.
You need a lot of people to operate this machine. So one person puts all the grain on top, another person puts it in. You have people who are taking on either side the products out, and then another person at least running the engine. That's a lot of people on one machine.
Steam threshing machines are veritable monsters. They devour huge amounts of straw and spit it out as grain. But you needed fire to operate them, and that made them dangerous.
In fact, it was actually quite dangerous. You think you've got a machine with fire in it and it's surrounded by lots of dry straw. I mean, you can imagine what potentially can happen there. And actually the safety that was in place was just a bucket of water.
The harvesting process continued to be hard work despite the mechanical assistance, and it still required lots of helping hands. So inventors continued looking for inventions that would simplify the drudgery on the field. The combine harvester was the solution. It combined the mower with the binder and the threshing machine, making all of these devices superfluous. The all-rounder on the field delights young and old alike. You can find it in miniature form in children's rooms. Some make their wedding vows on it. And die-hard combine fans head to work in their own harvest giant on a daily basis. You can even spot it among the gamers and computer geeks at the world's largest fair for computer and video games, the Combine Harvester, along with its loyal fan base.
Combines are pretty cool, gigantic machines. They're definitely some of the most beautiful farming machines. A big combine with a cutter bar of 9 or 12 meters. They're huge and powerful. These are definitely some of the most fascinating machines.
And you can drive these powerful machines in the computer game Farming Simulator. In the virtual world, farming fans can fulfill a childhood dream to cultivate and harvest their own fields.
My granddad had a farm back in the day. I used to help out there as a kid. I still have a love for farming, which is why Farming Simulator is perfect. You get an authentic impression of the feeling. Of course, sitting on a real combine harvester is different to the virtual experience, but it's great, especially if you go for the interior view mode. In a way, it does feel like sitting on an actual combine harvester.
To help players feel like real farmers, the game developers came up with something special.
I believe there is nothing more important in the game than authentic agricultural equipment. We have an awful lot of fans who insist that every screw is in the right place. The paint is right, and they really come to us and say, "Oh, my grandpa has this tractor. It looks different." Everyday people come and tell us it has to be a bit different. "My grandpa has the combine harvester," or "My father drives that one. Can you please put it into the game?" These are the messages I get all the time.
Playing farmer, almost like in real life. That's what the Farming Simulator promises. But the game also seems to touch on our archaic nature.
We've left the land. Most of us now live in towns and cities, but there must still be something deep inside us that wants to toil the land. It's the most successful game in Switzerland and Germany, and in total, these games have sold more than 5 million copies. That is a lot of farming.
At the Gamescom in Cologne, the most ambitious players of the game battle for glory. Only the best have made it here. They've trained for hundreds of hours in hope of taking home the grand prize today.
The chances are there. We're well prepared, we have a good strategy. I've been playing the farming simulator since 2009, and so have my team members. That's almost 10 years now, and we've been captivated by it ever since.
The total prize money for Farming Simulator is 250,000 euros. The Combine Harvester is a real cash cow, in the virtual world as well. The Combine not only allows for increases in agricultural yields, but also in the world's population.
Before the Combine Harvester, there were 2.5 billion people on the planet, and now there are more than 3 times that many. The Combine Harvester has had a huge role in allowing this increased population access to food.
All these people want food, and moreover, their food also wants to eat. Almost 60 billion animals are slaughtered every year. Around a third of the world's grain yield ends up as livestock feed. The other 2/3 and the animal products feed almost 8 billion people, made possible by the Combine Harvester. Every U.S. American, for example, eats an average of 287 kilograms of dairy products and 83 kilograms of meat a year. On top of that come 86 kilograms of grain products and 45 kilograms of maize. But sugarcane, peas, soybeans, sunflowers, and other crops are also harvested by the Combine. This means that more than half of what ends up in their stomachs is produced directly or indirectly using the Combine Harvester. Without it, our breakfast table would probably look pretty empty. Today, modern combines harvest most of the world's crops, but only a small part of the produce actually ends up on our plates. In the USA and South America, for instance, combines harvest large amounts of soy, and even more so because our consumption of soy is increasing all the time. But the vegans and vegetarians who want to enjoy their tofu burgers and soy latte without a guilty conscience are not to blame for this.
When you think of soy, you might think of soybeans or maybe the soy sauce that you put on your sushi, but actually 98% of soy that's grown isn't used for human consumption, it's fed to animals. Now, it's an ideal crop as an animal feed because it's very robust, because it's got a very high protein content.
Similarly, most of the maize harvest ends up in the troughs of our future steaks. But huge amounts of it also form the basis for a completely different energy supplier.
Well, maize is so important for the production of biogas because you can get high yields with maize and also a high yield of methane gas, which is a perfect alternative to petrol.
And that means that combine harvesters aren't just producing food for us, they're producing our future fuels.
Combine harvesters are the true all-rounders on the field. That's why they are purchased all over the world. Each one of them is tailored to the needs of its future owner. It takes 80 hours to assemble one of these individualized combine harvesters. In comparison, a small middle-class car is assembled in just 14 hours. Each combine harvests hundreds of thousands of tons of grain in its lifetime. Farms have always been family-run. The farmer's wife took care of the cattle, the household, and the children, while the farmer usually managed the farm and carried out the physically demanding work of harvesting. Today, fully air-conditioned machines do the arduous work. The drudgery on the fields in scorching heat is a thing of the past. In addition to rippling muscles, the farmers of today also need a whole set of different skills.
They need to be skilled in business. They need to know about economics and markets. They need to be an engineer and sometimes an IT specialist. The word farmer just doesn't seem to cover all of those things anymore.
The big farming machines do all the hard work nowadays. Muscle power hardly plays a role in farming anymore. That's why combine harvesters also have the potential to turn gender roles upside down.
The image of farming as a male-dominated community has certainly changed. In 2012, census data shows that 30% of farm operations in the United States are run by women. And in 2017, women farm owners out-earned their male counterparts by 15%. Things are changing.
Thanks to big harvesting machines, women can now take their rightful place in farming. But real equality is still a long way away.
Western agriculture is still years behind in gender equality, but things like the combine harvester have turned farming from manual labour into something much closer to business management, and women are beginning to take the lead.
The combine harvester offers a chance to loosen the rigid gender roles in the farming industry. It is no surprise that it was a woman who fantasized about the very first combine harvester in history. In 1834, a farmer's wife in the American Midwest had a dream. A monstrous machine rolls over her fields, its greedy mouth devours her harvest, and the finest threshed grain comes out at the back. The next day, she tells a neighbor about her strange dream. The neighbor was none other than the inventor Hiram Moore. Inspired by her dream, he builds the first combine harvester in 1835. The beast was 5 meters long, almost as wide, and ran with at least 20 horsepower. But being horse-driven also caused a lot of problems.
They trample the grain, meaning that not all of the harvest ends up in the thresher.
People had to take care of them, groom them, keep them in check, essentially, and that was a whole other job. But with the harvesters, without livestock, that job was taken away.
So although they make the work a bit easier, they don't really make it more efficient.
But a solution is close at hand. The steam engine is a global game changer. Energy is no longer dependent on natural resources like wind, water, and muscle power.
Steam engines revolutionized technology from the 18th century, and the way it worked was to heat water from its liquid form to gas form. And gas being expansive, it has very high pressure, drove a piston, and that movement of the piston was able to do other things, and that gave rise to the engine. And engines have powered so much ever since.
In 1886, George Stockton Barry invents the first steam-powered combine harvester with completely sustainable organic fuel. He burns what exists in masses on his own doorstep.
In the United States, agricultural areas are enormous, and cattle can freely graze on the pastures across the prairie, which means that straw is a waste product. They don't need it for stables or bedding, so it can be freely burnt as power for their combine harvester.
By the early 20th century, more than 2/3 of American grain fields are being harvested by combines.
With the tools we have today, farmers all over the country can produce great surpluses.
In Europe, it takes more than half a century longer for the combine harvester to become established. Because harvesters made in the USA simply won't work on European fields. The crop types here have longer stems, and because of the rainy summers, they often lie flat on the ground at harvest time, making it impossible for huge American combines to collect the harvest. So, is the combine harvester doomed to fail in Europe? A small family business in Germany sees its chance in the incompatibility of American machines. August Class combines two existing agricultural machines, the sheaf binding machine and the threshing machine. In 1937, the first tractor-pulled combine left the factory. It is perfectly adapted to the needs of European farmers. But its success is stifled in the early stages. In 1943, the company has to stop producing combine harvesters. The National Socialists strive for world supremacy and force Class to produce armaments for their war of aggression across Europe. The Second World War brings the entire production of European combine harvesters to a standstill. Then Germany loses the war. And the European combine harvesters get back on the road to success. Then, a world-shaking invention brings another quantum leap for the combine harvester. In the 20th century, the car starts its unstoppable success story. The combustion engine becomes ever cheaper and more powerful. What better idea than to try out the new drive technology on a combine?
As combine harvesters got bigger and more power-hungry towards the middle of the 20th century, the external combustion engines, steam engines, just didn't cut it anymore. The internal combustion engine took over, and it had a number of advantages.
In the 1950s, slaughterhouses operated at full capacity. Millions of horses and mules were taking their last steps. The time had come for them to make way for the more efficient combustion engine. In 1920, there were still around 25 million horses and mules in the USA. Just 30 years later, there are only 7.5 million. Today, we keep horses mostly as a hobby for equestrian sports or tourist attractions. They have served their time as work animals and simply cannot keep up with the internal combustion engine, but they are hard to beat in beauty and grace. The combine might make the farmer's job easier, but there's one thing it can't do: change the weather. Farmers still have to go to the fields in blazing heat to harvest the grain. And that's literally a dirty job.
Just through its operation, we're kicking up tons of dust into the air. In fact, the workers at the end of the day, they'd almost look like they'd been down the mines. I mean, that's crazy.
What to do? Isn't there some way to protect the driver from dirt or even from heat stroke? It wasn't until the 1980s that farming machinery engineers came up with the idea that the farmer could rest comfortably during the harvest as the new standard.
Only filtered and absolutely fresh air gets into the cabin, air-conditioned and individually adjustable. This way, the driver can feel good at work all day long.
But the air-conditioned cab was not the final technical innovation that made life easier for the farmer. The digital revolution is turning all areas of our life upside down. We can network with the whole world in seconds. Our devices are getting smart, and they communicate with each other. With digitalization for the combine harvester, too, a new age is dawning.
Today's combine harvesters are a smorgasbord of smart sensors and computer processing. They can tell how ripe the grain is. They can tell how dry it is. They can tell when the hopper's getting full and they need to schedule a drop-off and a refuel for the harvester. The farmer can relatively sit back, relax, and just monitor all these processes. It's absolute high-tech on wheels.
But the combine had to wait until the turn of the millennium before it could finally work fully independently. It may not need the farmer to drive it anymore, but it does require help from outer space.
Self-propelled harvesters work by constantly being in communication with satellites. So they know exactly where they should be at any given time. They don't repeat areas of the field that they've already covered. And everything is just so much more precise. And what is a great advantage of that is that the whole process of farming is so much more efficient. And it's done to an accuracy of 2 centimeters.
Modern combine harvesters cost as much as a one-family house and are almost as big. This was not always the case, as this retro commercial from the 60s demonstrates with quirky humor.
You could clear my entire forest with your tank there.
Okay. But only if you loan me your Columbus.
What for?
My electric razor is broken.
The cutters on today's combines are up to 14 meters wide. With their gigantic jaws, they can thresh incredible amounts of grain, and that's what matters to today's farmers. As their size increases, so does their performance. The high-performance engine of this combine is as big as a phone booth. True power beasts harvest our grain today. Intrigued by machinery of this kind, a bunch of do-it-yourselfers and farming machine freaks pimp their four-wheelers into serious racing vehicles. Although there's not a single part of an original combine harvester on their racers, the machines have to follow certain rules to pass as pseudo-combines.
The wheels in the front must be bigger than in the back. That's inspired from the old combines. This box is supposed to imitate the straw ejection. And on top, we have an imitated grain tank.
The race in Luxembourg is an exciting event. Accidents are inevitable and part of the spectacle, because only those who do their utmost to make their opponents lose control of their vehicle will win. To prepare for the worst, drivers must take certain safety precautions.
You must have a roll cage that is completely braced. We have bars on the sides, because if you flip over, your arms could hang out and be run over by the other machines. I have an emergency stop button on the inside, and another one here. If a fire breaks out, the machine has to be shut down immediately. Even today, something can happen. You never know.
The drivers from all over Europe put themselves in danger at every race. Almost every year there are injuries that can even make a tough guy nervous.
Like this way too shaky. We've been working towards this race all season. Today is the day, home race. You only have that once every 2 years. Many spectators have come to support us. That means a lot to me. I want to drive in a way that I can say I gave everything. Then, if something breaks, it breaks, but I've given my best.
Will that be enough for his home race? Plenty of fans of the Green Monster Chicken have come to see their local hero on the track. On the track, the race giants can reach speeds up to 100 kilometers per hour. This demands extreme concentration from the drivers. But the machines must also be able to withstand the pitfalls of the racetrack.
The girl sings!
The combine harvester is not only a working tool and a hobby for handymen. Over the course of history, it also became a threat to people. The combine harvester has claimed many victims on its way to becoming one of the most popular farming machines. It has not only made work easier for the farm worker, but has also taken it away from them. Countless jobs have fallen prey to the razor-sharp blades of its cutting devices or were lost under its oversized wheels. What remains a mere fantasy of violence in this B-movie became bitter reality in 20th century Europe.
At the end of the 19th century, the European labour landscape looked very different from today. Agriculture was the #1 source of people's livelihoods. In 1875, 3 out of 4 people would cultivate their own grain and slaughter their own animals.
70 years later, things have changed. Only one of these 4 people still works on the fields. Many look for work in the city or become unemployed. But is the combine harvester to blame for that? Only in part. Their poverty is fueled by another groundbreaking invention. Steam locomotives and steamships transport food to countries all around the world.
The steam engine was part of what we can now see, with the benefit of hindsight, was an ongoing process of globalization. It suddenly meant that food produced all around the world could be transported by steamship and over land by steam train to find entirely new markets. And suddenly, the world was getting an awful lot smaller.
Grain becomes an export hit, made in America. Between 1850 and 1900, exports of American wheat increased 40 times over. This ruins many farmers' livelihoods. Because no matter how hard the small European farms try, they cannot compete with the big farming businesses from the colonies.
In the United States, Australia, New Zealand and South America, farmers had access to huge amounts of land. Enormous amounts of grain could be planted and then harvested quickly and cheaply using this new agricultural machinery.
This makes grain from the colonies unbeatably cheap. The price of grain falls so dramatically that it's cheaper for Europe to buy grain from overseas than to produce it itself. The cheap grain puts pressure on European farmers. Those who cannot invest in new farming machinery are left behind. 9 out of 10 farms shut down in the course of the 20th century.
Back in the day, farms tended to be small, sustainable, run by lots of people, but with this industrialization, it's completely changed the landscape and the makeup of farming, and it put the small farms out of business. They weren't able to produce enough stuff, they couldn't afford the machinery, they have now gone, and actually most farms today are very, very large.
Almost a century ago, Europe looked like this from above. Today, after the triumph of the combine harvester, like this. What happened? Many small farms were swallowed up by larger farms. In order for the large farming machines to be able to cultivate the land efficiently, fields are incorporated and enlarged. Without the combine harvester, our fields would probably not go all the way to the horizon. On other continents, the combine has changed the environment as well. In Brazil, countless hectares of the Amazon forests has had to give way to automated farming. From space, you can even see the spread of the huge cattle pastures and soy fields with the naked eye. Like a vicious parasite, the fields gradually eat their way into this unique ecosystem. In America, huge forests have been cleared and vast plains accessed to be cultivated by the big farming machines. Many of the areas have to be irrigated artificially so that the earth can bear fruit. It's hard to imagine that before the discovery of America, half of the land was covered by dense forest. The rural exodus brought forward by the Combine continues to the present day. More than half of the world population now lives in cities. By 2050, it is expected to be more than 2/3. Small towns are growing into cities, cities into mega-cities.
Beijing will soon merge with several other cities in the area to create the Jing-Jin-Ji metropolitan region. It's going to contain 100 million people. That's an incredible number of people.
Especially in the developing countries, mega-cities are on the rise. And increasingly efficient combine harvesters are responsible for this too. Although they are hardly ever seen on the fields of the global south. For the farmers in Africa, time seems to have stood still. 80% of them still work with manual tools, without pesticides, without fertilizers, and without combines. In developing countries, the agricultural revolution has not really arrived yet. On the global marketplace, however, they have to compete with farmers from Europe and America. But the large high-tech farms there are up to 1,000 times more productive than the developing countries.
The agricultural revolution made rich parts of the world richer, but made poor parts of the world poorer. So despite rising productivity and stores full of grain, around 2 billion people still suffer from malnutrition. And that's a scandal.
Poor countries import more and more cheap grain from Europe and America. This makes them particularly dependent on fluctuations in global grain prices. If they rise, many of them can no longer afford their daily bread, and it seems that this is becoming more and more the case. Around the world, the weather is going crazy. Relentless droughts, raging hurricanes, erratic forest fires. Global warming is also making the combine harvester sweat. It is facing increasing criticism.
As these monster combine harvesters thunder across the fields, their tires press the topsoil down in such a way that it can become as hard as concrete. And after that, nothing grows.
Earthworms and other small creatures can hardly survive in the compressed ground. However, they are absolutely necessary as they loosen the soil and produce valuable humus. Without them, the fields become infertile. Often you see puddles of precious rainwater in the grooves left by farming machines, which simply evaporates in the sun. It can no longer seep into the compacted soil.
In recent years, farmers across the world have had to deal with more extreme weather conditions. So if a very dry spell is followed by a period of heavy rain, the compacted soil just can't absorb all of the excess water. It washes away and off the fields, taking with it fertile topsoil.
Thereby, precious topsoil is irretrievably lost and can only be rebuilt over many decades. The combine has brought another problem with it. Small fields are not suitable for the huge farming machines.
You can even see this in modern farms, where they rarely have potatoes, beets, grain crops all together. You usually concentrate on one product in order to make the best possible use of the technology you need.
As far as the eye can see, only wheat. As far as the eye can see, only soy. This makes it easy for the combine, but difficult for the environment.
If the same crop is grown across a large area, that crop extracts the same combination of nutrients from the soil. But farmers can combat this by adding artificial fertiliser back into the ground. However, it is a fine balance. If farmers add too much fertiliser, it can leach into the groundwater and local waterways, and that potentially can damage the health of humans, of animals, and of whole local ecosystems.
Animals can hardly find food in the monocultures anymore. Threatened animal species, such as bees, are particularly dependent on the diversity of the plant world.
If every plant for miles around blooms for only 2 weeks of the year, the bees will starve for the other 50. And monocultures are an absolute feast for pests, meaning farmers have to use more powerful neonic insecticides, which are known to decimate bee populations.
There was a particularly alarming study from Germany that showed that over 25 years, the weight of insects found in this particular part of the country had gone down by 75%.
So with monocultures, bees become poisoned or starved to death. And as a result, so could we.
The combine is in crisis. It has to move with the times and adapt to new circumstances. The dangers of compressing the soil and growing monocultures are no longer the concern of environmentalists alone. The food supply of all humanity is at stake. The combine harvester supplies food to nearly 8 billion people, but it could also ensure that we face an unprecedented food crisis. Here, agricultural engineers are working on a solution: nature-friendly combines.
If we pack more and more productivity into the machines, we see that cutter bars become 3 feet wider every 10 years, and that the machine weight increases by 3 tons every 10 years. We no longer consider ever larger machines to be up to date.
In their laboratory, researchers are studying how combine harvesters can become lighter without losing productivity. They came up with an unorthodox idea.
We take the function of a combine and divide it into several units. They all do the same thing, except now productivity is no longer loaded into one unit, but multiplied by the number of machines.
The cutter bar of a single mini thresher is only 6.4 meters wide, but the fact that 3 or more harvesters are operating at once means that they are wider overall and therefore more productive than any conventional combine. The good news is that the small combines weigh only a fraction. The soil does not compress under their load. Researchers are working on different concepts for future farming machines that ensure sustainable agriculture and still increase productivity. These are the challenges of our time.
By 2050, the world's population could reach 10 billion. That means we'll need to produce a huge amount more food under much more challenging conditions. And these are challenges that agriculture must rise to. As it has done in the past at crucial moments, it must adapt if it and we are to survive.
The combine harvester has changed everything: our environment, our society, our habitats, and our food. The combine is one of the most far-reaching inventions of mankind, but it also harbors dangers. Huge monocultures are destroying our ecosystems, and the technical advantage of the industrial nations is creating dependencies and famines for the global south. We need combine harvesters that protect our environment while increasing productivity, We need sustainable development projects for the Global South that allow farmers to invest in agricultural machinery. Only then can the combine harvester continue its success story as a great invention. Only then can it continue to positively influence our lives.